an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Traitor Queen, chapters 24, 25, and 26. Dangerous Minds, Before the Battle, and Beginnings and Endings. In these chapters, Lorkin finally confesses what actually happened to him in prison to Tyvara and to Savara, and they don't take it too badly, even though they don't really have any answers for him, which I have to admit, I sort of appreciated. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. When I say that they don't really have any answers for him, what I really mean by that is he is looking to them for confirmation that the girl who drank this water was a traitor, and therefore he was blameless in her death. And they can't tell him that. They don't think that she was, but it's not like they have got all of the information at all times. And they point out to him that, because of the nature of what they do, a lot of the traitors have to make the same kind of call that he had to make all the time. And they don't really hold it against him that perhaps this was an innocent person who was unaware of what was about to happen. They know that he was doing his best, and that I think it really just comes down to knowing him well enough to realize that, he isn't going to just try and kill somebody. I mean, it's the kind of thing for me with him where, sometimes I run into this in movies and books and TV shows where a character is so afraid of confessing what happened to a person, or what happened, something that they did, period, because they're worried about what the perception is going to be. And I am I'm good enough often at compartmentalizing things that I forget not everybody can or cares to do that. Some people wouldn't see compartmentalization as an asset or an advantage. And so there are times where people are like, I don't want to share with them what went on, because they have a sort of concern or shame that were I in their shoes, I wouldn't have. Not because I don't think it's warranted that somebody be concerned, but that I'm so certain they will understand that I just don't really think there's any true danger in them judging this person the way they are anticipating being judged. This is something that, I recognize that I have this, and so it can be a bit of an obstacle when I'm trying to relate to a character, because they are so worried about people finding out about a thing that in my mind is a non-issue, and that I do not think they need to be worried about. Lorkin's case is sort of interesting because I felt both ways for him. I felt it was really going to be a non-issue, that they would understand, pretty much what they say, which is, we're traitors and we do a lot of stealth shit and having to make snap decisions. We have been in your shoes. We get it. That's honestly kind of what I was expecting, but not, I hadn't really put it into words. I just kind of felt like, man, they're gonna get it. You were literally being tortured, and no, you weren't physically harmed, but what was happening was a torture of you and that woman. I don't feel like, it's not like you gave up any information. You still stayed honorable and true to their cause. And in that respect, I feel like they would have that. I feel like more than what happened to this woman, him keeping their secret would be what was important to them. And it seems like really that's what it comes down to. And this understanding that like, we are all just doing the best we can and operating with the information that we have and trying to make sense of things when we just don't necessarily always know what's best. And so I had, on the one hand, this like idea that it would really be fine, but because of actually watching how this went down, and I think also it being in particular an upsetting part of these books in a way that other scenes haven't really been, this for me has been particularly disturbing, the whole thing that happened with this girl. I felt like I had a lot more compassion and understanding for his worry. And so it was a combo of me being a little frustrated and being like, I'm sure it's going to be fine, dude. And also recognizing how traumatized he likely is, that this is really, you know, when I was talking about how other plots can make me frustrated because somebody should confess something and they're worried, oftentimes it will be something that's sort of petty and something that can be easily misunderstood, and, you know, needs explaining, but once you like have all the info, it's very obvious. This is something that's a lot more about a psychological toll that it took. The trauma of going through, seeing this happen in front of him, being unable to help, wanting to help, and not really knowing the best way to do that without causing more harm. That's a really tricky area. And so his being ashamed to talk about it, this makes a lot of sense to me. So I think that's something that oftentimes the psychological aspect of the concern over confession won't work for me in a lot of properties, you know? And this is one where I feel like it really does. And it's just interesting to me, the kinds of things that we can have shame about, even when we know ourselves we did our best, or we know ourselves that we weren't at fault, you know? Like, for an odd example, when I was engaged the first time and we split up, my fiance's name at the time was Ruben. I left him and he was really hurt and upset. And to try and get back at me, he asked my mother out for a drink, like very sincerely. It was an ask out. It was not something that could be misconstrued. And my mother didn't tell me that he did this until after he had finally moved out of the apartment. And it was the sort of thing that part of it was she didn't want me to flip out on him, which, good thinking on her part, because I nearly did. But when I expressed disgust with him and horror at his behavior, she started crying and said that she was afraid to tell me because she thought I would think it was her fault. That I was going to worry that she was somehow like inviting this behavior. And I mean, if that's not it's a perfect example of women being told to blame themselves for men's behavior. But it's also a perfect example of like, if I were to read in a book that a woman was afraid, my initial reaction to like share that information with her daughter, my initial reaction would be like, of course she'll understand it wasn't you. What? But not everybody is as understanding. And we have this hammered into our heads that we should blame ourselves. And it all depends on who it is that you are about to talk to and the frame of mind that they're going to be in when you tell them the thing. Because some people will be very different in their reception, depending on the mood they're in, what just happened. Perhaps if there's like an ongoing conflict, what stage of like the conflict or acceptance of circumstances they're in. And, yeah, it's just kind of like, and the fact that it comes second in his list of confessions, because he basically has a whole like moment of truth with the two of them, Tyvara and Savara. Like, what has gone on with him is that he is still able to pick up on people's surface level thoughts. And I have to be honest. The surface level thoughts plot point being introduced, I am not really sure how I feel about this at the moment. I really would like to hear from some people who have read this as well to see what they think, because part of me finds it interesting, and it makes sense to me that there might be abilities that we aren't aware of yet that, you know, are super uncommon. On the other hand, it feels a little bit late in the game to be tossing this on the pile of things that we're dealing with. And it's also, as far as I can tell, and this may not be true, so I'm saying this with the information I have now, as far as I can tell, there isn't really a factor that has caused this to suddenly be possible for Lorkin. With the asterisk, perhaps it is learning black magic that has opened up this ability in him. I say that because it's the only correlation I can think of between the onset of this ability and a massive change in the way that he is operating as a person. Learning black magic is the only thing I can think of. I do not know why that would be. And if it is the cause, this begs the question, are there other latent abilities that other people may have as a result of learning black magic that are suddenly opened up? Because obviously in Kyralia, black magic is not practiced commonly, so they don't have any means of knowing. But in Sachaka, if this was something that happened because of the black magic, does that mean that there are some people walking around Sachaka who can also read surface level thoughts? And if so, are they all keeping it secret? Is that the only ability that's out there? Because you can't tell me that in an entire country full of people, nobody else has this ability. I really wouldn't buy that. Unless we're going to do some sort of weird, bloodline thing, like the Skywalkers, where we're trying to act like everybody is sort of everybody with abilities of a certain type are related to one another, which, I've always been sort of against that concept. I always prefer the idea that anybody can be granted with ability, and it has nothing to do with the circumstances of your birth, which you have no control over. It's about your choices. So I don't know. I'm very curious to see where this goes, because if no explanation is made as to why he can suddenly do this, as far as I can tell, let's see. Let me just check the page numbers here. I hate that every Kindle app version is different. So let's see. Chapter 27 starts at page 443, and the epilogue begins at 541. Okay, so that's about 100 pages. So I've got about 2 episodes left of coverage. That is not a long time to perhaps explain how this came about and who else has the abilities, and really get into that at all. Now, Ashleigh, I see on my schedule that I have a number more Traitor Queen episodes booked. This is part of the danger when I have to calculate as I go along how many pages each week. Is there another book beyond this in this series and set in this universe? Or are you wanting to put those towards something else? Because I could see perhaps if I'm saying that like Lorkin's the author. If Trudy Canavan is setting up Lorkin discovering this ability as a means of opening up something that could become the next book and exploring this a little bit further. So what I'm saying really comes down to, if it turns out that this is really the end of this, it's an odd thing to do. And as of right now, all we've seen really is like this odd thing that's going on with Kalia, where she's like thinking about how she's going to betray them, and she kind of like screws up and then she takes it back. And I don't really feel that's like hugely important as of right now. I really don't know, though, in the short amount of time that's left, what you could do to make it feel like this addition to the lore of the magical world here makes sense. So I just wanted to bring that up because it's a sort of odd thing that, in theory, I'm not against it, that this could happen. I just don't feel like the underlying structure of the story supports it super well. And it doesn't feel at the moment like it's leading to anything. But that is not to say it won't. It's just that when you introduce a mechanic like this, often if it does lead to something major within the plot, it feels like you needed something in the plot to happen. So you suddenly decided that there is a mechanic that, has to function in this world in order to have the plot point happen. And when I say that, what I'm really thinking about is like the concept of wand lore in Harry Potter. Wand lore is one of those things that, like, you cannot tell me J.K. Rowling thought that through before she reached the final book. And as interesting an idea as it is, it 100% feels like it is invented for the sake of having the wand obey a certain person in the end, in a way that doesn't entirely work for a lot of us. It's like, okay, technically I guess, but this isn't a type of magic that we've grown like accustomed to or too familiar with. And so it really does feel like within the same book, you tell me this is a thing and make that thing the key. That feels a little bit sloppy to me. But anyway, all right. I just wanted to talk about Lorkin because, like, a lot of what Lorkin's dealing with is, in my opinion, some of the more interesting stuff in the books. Because I find Lorkin to be in a really interesting position in terms of he's poised between Kyralia and the traitors. He's poised between, being taught that black magic is inherently a bad and dangerous thing, and seeing the good that can be done with it and how creative you can be with it. And Sania, in some ways, could have been this person, because we know that Sania is a good person and that she used her abilities for good and to protect Kyralia. But she really learned the magic from a fellow Kyralian to defend Kyralia, and that's about it. She didn't actually explore further, find out more uses, or discover anything new. So while I may understand that, black magic isn't inherently evil because she can do it and we like her as a character and a person, that isn't the same thing as as seeing that black magic may be better, inherently better and more versatile than the magic that she knows. And there's been no real indicator in her points of view that she misses using it, resents having to like set it aside. She resents the way she's treated because of it sometimes. It limits her in the way that they trust her. But it's always sort of a circumstantial thing and not really related to her feelings about the magic itself. Lorkin is on the cusp of like a new era in magic in Kyralia, in my opinion. He is somebody who truly is starting to be like, ooh, the guild doesn't really get it. They don't have it right. And not only that, but he has decided to throw in with the traitors because, one, he fell in love with one of them, but two, he recognizes the inherent rightness of their cause. This brings me to something about what's going on with him too, that I am worried about, but I just hope isn't going in the direction that I think it's going. So this author is clearly a big fan of using romance as a means to like push the plot along. And that's always a danger zone for me. I mean, we all know romance for me is just a tricky one. And in some ways, I do feel that, and I said this in the last episode of coverage as well, Lorkin doesn't like feel quite as strongly about the rightness of freeing all the slaves as I want. He just keeps sort of like making these caveats in his mind for the way that the traitors are handling things sometimes when there's violence that he feels is a little bit too aggressive. And it does feel like him being in love with Tyvara is sort of meant to cement his commitment to the traitors in a way that I really wish we didn't need. I would like him to feel passionately about this without her influence. And I am not convinced that he would as a character. The author hasn't convinced me of his passion in this arena. And I see this happening also with Dannyl. Dannyl is like somebody who really detests slavery in theory, but he is so quick to defend Ashaki Achati. And as much as he's like, I'm not in love with him, there is like a preoccupation with Ashaki Achati that I am very tired of. And it feels like this is leading to him low-key hoping the traitors lose, which I really do not want to watch Dannyl, a character I previously really liked, not only become less interesting, which has already happened, but become someone who's hoping the slavers win. Because I do feel a teeny bit like we're heading there, and I don't fucking care for that. And it's a weird thing that this author is like setting up a war between what I would consider good and evil. People who want equality and people who enslave human beings and treat them like farm animals. That to me is a no-brainer. Which side is the good side? And yet Traitor Canavan is continuously playing the both sides angle. And I feel like she's using these romances to do it in a way that it's just cheap. And I mean, I don't want to say it couldn't possibly work if you were really excellent at getting the romance between Dannyl and Ashaki fleshed out, Ashaki Achati, then maybe I could understand it a little bit more. If there was any indicator that Ashaki Achati wasn't behind slavery as a concept, but he is deeply loyal to his king. I mean, that's just like repeatedly a bit of a theme with him, is that he is a man who is honorable and will do his duty. And his duty is to uphold a wildly oppressive, evil system. And so I can't respect that. And I feel like Dannyl does. And I feel like Traitor Canavan created this like love triangle, in order to make Dannyl a bit like have complicated feelings about this whole thing. And I don't think it works. And it does not make me feel like Ashaki Achati is a sympathetic character. It makes Dannyl less sympathetic and makes me actively like, wow, you aren't who I thought. Fuck you then. Whatever, you know? And combining this with the way that she has decided clearly she is having Sania and Regin become a thing. There's just no denying that's what she's doing. This author is bad at romance. It's just, I wanted so bad for something like in this respect to work out in this book. But the only relationship that she has had that felt like interesting to me was Dannyl and Tayend, because the two of them were each unsure of the other. I really liked Dannyl, and he had more personality back then. And, you know, the nature of their relationship being disapproved by like most of society and having to keep it secret, and the oppression that they were facing with that felt really compelling. Other than that, all of the romances that she's had in this entire series have fallen very flat to me. And more even than flat, have been actively problematic. I mean, there's Acheron and Sonia, and there was like a huge age gap and a huge power differential, and it was really uncomfortable and weird. Then we've got Regin and Sonia, where he like tried to kill her when he was a kid, and it just doesn't feel like that has adequately been dealt with to me. Lorkin and Tyvara is the one that feels like they're on the most even footing, other than Dannyl and Tayend, and feels like the most, that one, it's like, I don't have any outright problems with. I don't care about it that much. I'll say that. I like it better than the others, and that's pretty much as I can say. And then there's Dannyl and Ashaki Achati, which, like, he handled things with Tayend really badly. Tayend's clearly trying to, like, convince or get him to, like, talk about what happened between them, and Dannyl's being a major coward about it, and Ashaki Achati owns slaves and is trying to defend that. And I'm trying to think if there was, like, what's the name of the woman in Tessia is the one from the book that's, like, the sort of prequel. I think her relationship that she, like, wound up getting into with that boy, that was okay. It wasn't like I was hugely invested, but it wasn't actively upsetting. And then, of course, there's the whole thing with, like, Sania and Dorian, where it's sort of brought up for reasons that I can't understand, because absolutely nothing ever even happens with that. And Dorian doesn't seem like a player of any consequence in the overall story. So I really don't understand why he was even brought back into the picture at all, to be honest. But yeah, so like those are the ones that, out of what I think I named like 6 different relationships, 2 of them are acceptable in general in the terms of like not being offensive. And most of the others are, if not outright offensive, due to the weirdness of abuse and age differences and whatnot, are really just not compelling. And I wish so much that instead of investing her time as a writer in those relationships and trying to always make there be a romance in each book, that she would instead get more into the magic and the way that the magical system works. Because I just cannot get past how many opportunities there have been to do something truly interesting, and how little she's followed up on that in favor of wasting our time with things that just don't seem to matter at all in the end. And I'm frankly baffled by it. And it worries me, like, if there is a book after this, if this story continues, it feels like as the series has continued, she has grown more and more uninterested in this universe as a writer. And I'm like, does she get back to feeling excited and wanting to like go into stuff? Or is this just kind of going to continue? So yeah, like I said, the whole thing with Lorkin and Tyvara, it just feels like she didn't think that there was a good enough reason for him to want to keep his word to the traitors unless there was a woman he was in love with mixed in with the traitors. And I find that disappointing. I find it a bummer that both he and Dannyl come across as characters for whom their morals and their sense of what is like fair and just regarding human rights is malleable according to how they feel about one individual involved. And as much as that may actually be true about human nature, you don't want that to be true about your heroes and protagonists in a story like this. It's one thing to have them be complicated. It's another thing to have them feel like they are that easily influenced, and it's just kind of like, worrisome. So the start of chapter 24, and I've talked about a lot of what happens in these chapters, like in a general sense, so I'm not that worried about just starting to talk about chapter 24 half an hour in. Everything that I have discussed so far, I think is really fair and needed to be talked about. And I want to put it on the table at this point because, like I said, there's only really 2 episodes left. And I want to make clear what will be, for me, a satisfying, like, what kind of information I'm looking for in order to be happy with the ending versus what I'm hoping she'll pull back on and not really, like, lean on too much. And if she does, I'm going to be disappointed. So chapter 24, Dangerous Minds. Sania and Regin are with Saral and Temi still. They're being escorted. It's really clear that these two being Saral and Temi, are not happy about being assigned this babysitting duty still. And they come across this estate, and all of these ex-slaves come out and help them out. And I've really appreciated that, like, Saral is trying to get Sania some information about Lorkin, and Sania seems to appreciate this as well. Like, as much as she doesn't want to be doing this job, she is understanding Sania's, like, concern as a mother and the fact that they're, like, in the midst of a war. But here we go. The ex-slaves led them into the estate where they dismounted, and the horses were taken away. A middle-aged woman and her 2 daughters approached and welcomed them. Tiatia is the former owner's wife. She welcomed Queen Savara into her home when she arrived. And her husband is in the east. He is a good man, and we did not want him to die. We knew there was a chance that he would be forced to fight along with the other Ashaki, or that we would not have a chance to speak in his defense, so we arranged him to be out of the country. And this basically is a nice moment of acknowledging that the traitors aren't totally unaware that there are people living in this society that are doing their best within it, maybe don't. Like, I really feel that if you have a problem with this, you should leave the country, truly. But if we're going to set that aside and say that people have to stay here, which I don't think they do, but let's pretend they do. This is a demonstration that they will have mercy and take into account how somebody treated their slaves, even if they were a master, how somebody treated their spouse as well, because we find out that he taught his wife magic. And that is something that is really not allowed. And he did it anyway. And that, for all of them, is more than anything an indicator of his feelings about fairness and equality, because teaching somebody magic is giving them a means to defend themselves or potentially attack you. And if he was doing that, it meant that he valued the concept of her having the means to defend herself and the tools more than he was concerned about them being used against him. And that's a big tell, you know? So yeah, and it's sort of weird too, because like this woman, the way that they discover that she's a magician is that she's making some raka, and Sania is watching her make it, and then she notices that the pot boils almost immediately. And Sania is like, oh, are you a magician? And apparently this woman had not intended to out herself. And I guess she just used magic without really thinking about it. The two traders were both gazing at Tia in surprise. Yes, Tia said in a quiet voice. My husband taught me. Saral let go an inhaled breath. Now I'm willing to think your husband may be all you claim he is. And Sania's thinking, I mean, I get what you're saying, but what if he didn't teach her higher magic? In my opinion, I don't think that's even a possibility. To me, the Sachakans do not view anything that doesn't include higher magic as magic at all. So I do not expect that if her husband taught her magic, he would keep that aspect of it to himself. But we don't really get confirmation of that. So, on behalf of all the people here, Veli said, I offer our strength to you. We gave strength to Queen Savara and her team this morning. We will have recovered enough to do the same for you tomorrow. And I appreciate this, that everybody is just willing to throw in the way that they can, you know? And at this point, Sania is thinking about how Regin has been giving her power as well every morning. And here is when she starts thinking as well about being more aware of him. And it's becoming more and more obvious that the groundwork is being laid for the two of them to get together by the end of this book. And then we go to Lorkin. And he is having a hard time, actually, shutting out the minds of all of the people around him because he's not used to this. It's, like I said, a fairly recent development for him. And he's also struggling with the trauma of constantly remembering what happened to that girl and that keeping him awake. And he's thinking about Kalia and how she's accusing him still of being a spy, how she will give him and Tyvara really venomous looks, and how she's sort of behaving when Savara's looking, but whenever her attention is somewhere else, he can feel Kalia get really there's just a lot of hostility coming from her. And let's see. Kalia was sleeping on the other side of the room. Though he knew he'd probably have no better success reading her mind than before, he steadied his breathing and began to concentrate. He heard a familiar mental voice, and he felt cold rush through his body. It was the same mental voice that had spoken into his own mind months before in Sanctuary, the same presence that had gone seeking information he did not want to give. They'll blame her, all the deaths. I'll make sure they do. Can't let Savara rule. Better if she dies in battle. Arrange that. But how? When she's weak. Speakers will falter. Tyvara is too young. Foolish to pick her. Nobody will follow her. Better if she dies too. But how? And this is one of the moments where I feel like this author really is not good at certain basic things. So we just read this paragraph here. We can't let Savara rule. Better if she dies in battle. Arrange that. But how? Tyvara too young. Better if she dies too. But how? The very next paragraph. Lorkin realized he had been holding his breath. I was wrong. Now that she's not subconsciously hiding her thoughts, they're loud and clear. They've been amplified by malice and glee. She's going to make sure Savara dies in the coming battle. Tyvara too, if she can. I know. I just read that. I don't need you to explain to me. That's what she's thinking. I heard it. Just now. what a weird thing to do. I don't understand why she, like, it slows everything down, and it's so unnecessary. I don't get it. It's fine to say that her thoughts have been amplified by malice and glee. That makes sense, that somebody is feeling really strongly about the feeling, that it's sort of like amplifying their thoughts. That totally, I get that. But following it up with like just restating the actual thing that the woman said is just such a baffling choice to me. So he finally thinks it over and decides whether or not he's going to tell Tyvara about what he can do. And he knows that some people who are suspicious of him, if they are to hear that he can read surface thoughts, are going to feel even more so that he is a spy. But he decides to do like a mind-to-mind conversation with Tyvara and explains to her what the situation is. And she's like, all right, well, you really need to tell Savara. So they go and talk to her, and she is basically like, all right, we are going to have to watch our back. But before we even deal with that, Lorkin, how did you have this ability and you have never said a word about it? This is a major thing to hide amongst people that went out on a limb to trust you. And she asks what else he's hiding, and he gets real weird. And she's like, oh, okay, we'll just sit here and wait until you're ready. And finally, he tells them about the girl. You made a hard and terrible choice, and one you can never know was right or wrong. Our spies make these choices all the time. We can hardly hold it against you. And then they say, is there anything else you wish to confess? And finally, he brings out the stone from the wasteland that his mother found. Or that he found, actually. I think this is like, she told him about finding one, and he went and searched and found one of his own. And this basically is a confirmation. Savara's like, yep, we did that shit. And he says something like, so you'll get credit for restoring it. And she says, now that the guild knows, I doubt we will. I mean, I don't see that the guild will say anything. I think you can keep that credit. Maybe it's not totally deserved, but I also feel like it was such a stroke of genius to keep it up this way that I really can't hold it against you, you know? And it wasn't like, as far as I know, it wasn't like it hurt anybody who was like a slave necessarily. It kept Sachaka as a nation slightly weaker. And to me, that has to be to the good. So, I don't know. I still think you should get credit, is what I'm saying. And they decide that they're not going to tell Lorkin, anybody of Lorkin's ability. They are not going to set up Kalia, because Tyvara is sort of like, well, we can trick her into doing something. And Savara is like, no, we can't make any move that will be able to be like turned around so that she can say we took advantage of her or we tried to like tempt her. It has to be 100% her choice to get us and like to come after us. So then we have Dannyl, and he is approached by one of the slaves and notices that, one, he does not throw himself to the floor, and two, he is very, very smiley. And basically this dude is here to tell him the traitors are going to be here by tomorrow, and we have decided to leave now. The Ashaki know that the traitors are coming and they're killing slaves, and as much as we actually like you and don't think that you would do anything like that, you can't protect us from everybody that might show up. And they might actually come after you for power as well. So if I were you, I would get the hell out of here. Tip, if you decide to stay, excuse me, if you decide to stay, I recommend going into the slave quarters and taking a look around, because there are lots of places to hide and there are lots of exits that they may not know about. And I thought that was kind of neat, actually. I am interested to see, because Dannyl like winds up leaving here, but I wish that we got more of a look at that. So then we go to Lilia, and she is just having such a hard time with the fact that Anya got captured and blaming herself. And eventually she meets up with Rothan and Gull and Jonna, and they're disguising, or they smuggled Ceri's body out disguised as a servant. And they are figuring out a plan for how to get at Skellen, because they're certain he is going to want to make a trade of knowledge of black magic from her for Anya. And it's unclear how much they think that he would actually give Anya back. I feel like that Anya isn't somebody, if I were Skellen, that I would let go. Not really, because she is the son or the daughter of a man who had been respected and had a lot of power. And granted, he doesn't anymore, but her being his heir, like, that's something that would just kind of command a sort of respect that you can't help. And she is a clearly, like, smart, resourceful, and maybe vengeful person. You're creating an enemy for life if you let her go. So I probably wouldn't. But he has to at least pretend. So he has sent a message that he wants her to meet him in this certain place, not to tell anybody, to show up alone. And it takes a while until finally they realize that they could use like a blood ring to communicate with each other, because they're feeling like, well, obviously we can't just send you alone like he's asking, but I don't know how to do this otherwise. I'm trying to find the thing. Oh, right. And I forgot Rothan is like, I am, it won't mean we can't catch him and deal with him. It'll just be a little bit more dramatic if we do. We've considered what to do if he does learn black magic. Right. And you have to make sure she can get away before you teach him anything. If he has sources here, a disguise may not work. If it weren't for these sources, I'd suggest we go to the higher magicians. They could have Callan make a blood ring so we can track Lilia with it. If the exchange goes badly, we'll be close enough to help. And she's like, oh, but I can make a blood ring, so that works. And Gull is actually like kind of quiet here because his plan with the explosives didn't work. And we wind up finding out that the mine fire, the wicks got wet from the moisture in the walls. I call bullshit. Like, I feel like if you are working in a mine, the moisture would be a factor you'd have to consider, and the wicks should be somewhat resistant to that. But, you know, what do I know? Maybe not. It's fine. This idea of using a blood gem, if I'm getting it right how they work, will only be any good to us if you can pick the place you're seeing through. You're seeing through it. What if you don't know where they are? What if you're blindfolded? Does Skellen know what a blood ring is? He might notice it and make her take it off. And Lilia says, I'm not supposed to wear a blood ring made from anyone else's blood except Sania and Callan's. Whoever supplied the blood would be able to read my thoughts and might learn about black magic. So Gull must wear one made of your blood. And she tells Gull, and you must smash it if anyone tries to get a hold of it. Otherwise, it could be used against Lilia. And then Rothan comes up with the idea that if you do something small and constant with your magic, we could potentially track you by sensing that, because that's how we found Sania, was like putting out our magical senses and detecting when she was using magic. So that could be a way for us to track you. And everybody offers strength to Lilia for this task. And she winds up meeting with him a little bit later. And it's like, I don't really know what I expected, but he's much more exposed than I thought he would be. He's on a boat. He wants her to what do you call it? Levitate. I kept wanting to say elevate. I'm like, that's not right. He wants her to levitate across to him, and she doesn't want to initially because it'll use up some of her magic. But she took power, and so I was kind of like, that doesn't seem like something you need to worry about at this point. And the whole thing, it like really comes down to the wire. She is a bit surprised at how intelligent he is in terms of how he has set up this whole exchange, and everything that she tries to like say about ways to put him off his goal, he has already thought of and come up with a reason why that won't work. And yeah, it's just one of those situations where I guess I pictured him having a lot more layers between him and her that she would have to get through, like security. But instead, he's just sort of out in the open in like a way that I wouldn't have expected, because my brain is like working in the way that a movie would work, where it's like, well, he's laid himself open to snipers or something, because he's on the deck of this ship. And to me, it just felt like, why wouldn't you find yourself someplace a little bit more with like a one-way entrance that she can't get out of, and there are people but I think the answer is, if we did that, Lilia wouldn't win, and we need her to win. Ashleigh's here. Sorry, I'm so late. It's okay. I do only have like 5 minutes left, but so I'm trying to like jump back and forth because I did a lot of talking about things overall in the first half hour and have been only going like plot beat by plot beat for the past like 20 minutes or so. So trying to find Savara. Another man's slave is another man's problem, Savara quoted. They're probably too busy trying to stop their own slaves escaping than worrying about everyone else's. All that kept slaves in place was the fact that there was nowhere to run to. An escaped slave would eventually be caught and sent back to his master. Unless an Ashaki manages to round up and imprison all of his slaves in one place, he can't stop some of them from getting away, and plenty of Ashaki are away from home fighting us. So that's working out for all of them, and they're just building up a real head of steam here. It just doesn't feel like, to me, the Ashaki stand a chance with a number of people. Like, how many slaves are there that could potentially have magical ability that they don't know about, in addition to the traitors? And the traitors are fairly well organized. Yeah, I just don't think this is going to go super well for them. While Lorkin saw the advantage in, King and Makira must expect the traitors to join together to form one army once they reached the city. Savara had indicated they would do so eventually, but for now the traitors remained in smaller groups, taking advantage of most of the populace of Sachaka being on their side. While the Ashaki were out hunting for them, the traitors were lying low, growing stronger on the strength of the Ashaki slaves. While Lorkin saw the advantage of that, he was also worried that keeping the traitor army divided made it vulnerable. The king's army could easily defeat one of the smaller traitor groups. It would be weakened by the fight, but in time it would regain its strength, while the traitors, once dead, they stayed that way. I don't feel like it's been established to me why the king's army could easily defeat one of the smaller traitor groups if they are in, setting up a home base in a smaller building. I guess they could just blow the building up, is really what he's thinking here. But that would sort of wind up leveling the city. And in the end, if you do that much damage to your own territory, is that winning? It's the sort of thing where you have to balance that sort of situation. And if it's just this overwhelming display of force, you are not only destroying like the actual structures of the buildings that make up your city, you are eliminating most of the population and all of the slaves. Like, you know, one by one, you're hitting groups that are comprised of a lot of slaves. So then what? The Ashaki come back to a city where all of their homes have been like razed to the ground and all of the slaves are dead, and they just do what then? I completely understand in a short term what Lorkin's talking about, but I don't feel like that's how the king would handle it. And I don't think that he needs to worry about it in this way. But I could be totally wrong about that. So the city will be empty by tomorrow, Savara murmured, except for the Ashaki. The ones returning from the west will join those still here, and then we'll see if our strategy and preparations and losses lead to the freedom we seek. At this point, he gets hit by something, and he breaks his arm. And it's like he can do something to like lessen the pain, but he isn't able to fully heal it because he is realizing, oh shit, we're being attacked. I can't use up my magic healing myself because who knows what's about to come at me. 4 Ashaki were standing on a nearby rooftop. As they struck out with fire strike, their faces were bathed in red light. None looked much older than Lorkin. Below, ex-slaves had noticed the battle. Some were running away, some had stayed to watch. Excuse me. A shout came from below. A streak of light shot up the street. The traitors watching had noticed the battle and joined in. The Ashaki looked down and, realizing that they were outnumbered, retreated. 3 disappeared into a hatch, but the last, forced to defend with no help, faltered. A strike from Savara sent him tumbling away from the hatch, then over the far edge of the roof. And they are looking at these buildings and realizing that there's light coming through one of them and that it has been lit on fire. Savara turned and led the way back to the hatch behind them. As she started down the rope ladder, Tyvara grabbed her arm and pulled... Tyvara grabbed his arm, and pulled Lorkin after her. And he says something to her later about... well, I'm getting ahead of myself. So at the bottom, he pushed through the door to find it was now part of the master's room. He saw that she stood over 3 bodies. 2 were Ashaki, but the third, Lorkin's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the woman as Speaker Helana. So this is the first, loss of somebody that he actually knows. And she was supposed to be setting up defenses around the house. And Savara is basically like, well, if they attacked us here, we can't stay. We got to get the hell out of here. Who knows what else they could be inside of our defenses and hiding. We just got to get out of here. But the traitors were returning to the room. One stepped out of a side passage near Lorkin, and as he turned, his heart darkened. Kalia stared at him, then gave him a wide berth. Which is odd. I'd expect a glare, at least. He narrowed his eyes at her back and concentrated. He caught no surface thought, just a racking feeling of guilt. It's her fault, he gasped. Nobody looked up. They hadn't heard him. The room was too noisy. He turned to find Tyvara staring at him. Say nothing, she sent. This is not the time. So, I'm very curious, what she did. Did she tip off these guys that they were there? What happened? Did she kill this woman herself, thinking that it was Savara from the back or something? What exactly was it that she was supposed to have done here? So we go back to Sania and Regin. They're in the city. It's super quiet at this point. And there's a lot of this sort of theme of areas where there's tons of slaves congregated and it's just there's so much activity and it's kind of chaotic. And then areas where there's nobody and it's really kind of creepy. And they come across this estate here where one of the women who is escorting them goes in to like check things ahead. And she gets in touch with Osen here, is basically told to like do what she's asked by the traitors. And I'm trying to find this spot. So she's talking to Regin, and he's like, so if they decide that they're going to go join up with the main battle, you're told to stay here, but you're not going to do that, are you? Because we're talking about your son, so you'll definitely follow. And she's like, well, I might. And if I do, you have to stay here. And he's like, lol, no, I am absolutely not doing that. I will follow you. That's the thing. I am supposed to supply you with power. I'm not going to just let you go by yourself. What are you talking about? And I was like, good for you, dude. Honestly, that's the whole point, right? So Dannyl is asleep. He gets woken up by Osen being like, hello, we had a fucking appointment, and he missed it. And they come up with this idea to have Dannyl get close to the battle and wear Osen's blood ring, and for Sania to also wear the blood ring so that she can watch the battle through Dannyl's eyes via Osen being like the middleman, which is actually a pretty neat idea. It's basically like a satellite, and she's watching cable. So he has to figure out a way to get closer to this battle that he is worried about and does not really want to get near. And there's also the idea that if Sania does want to swoop in and take matters into her own hands, Dannyl is a much better excuse for her to do that because he's a representative of Kyrelia and an ambassador than it would be to like swoop in and help her son who's working for the traitors. And so he is a very, very good excuse. So what I had been going to say earlier about Tyvara and Lorkin's conversation is he gets shown a bunch of crystals that do all of these cool things that basically are on a vest that's like the equivalent of a bandolier of bullets or something. And he mentions how he mentions how he can use healing magic to soothe his fatigue. And she's like, wait, you can do what? And he's like, oh, yeah, I didn't mention it, I guess, but I can definitely do that. And she's like, okay, maybe you should tell our fucking queen about that. What do you think? And he's like, oh, yeah, you have a point. Okay. So they go and tell the queen, and she's like, oh, yeah, I mean, cool, thanks. But we figured that out already, and we actually have a stone that will do that. We've figured out, a few ways around the fact that you didn't tell us a lot of shit. And I was like, good for you. Because again, he's about to try and show her how this works. And somebody yet again is like, but he's not one of us. Are you sure? And I'm like, ugh, can we not do this again? So I think that I've covered everything because Lilia is only just meeting up with Skellen by the end of chapter 26. Yeah, this is when she's like, well, we'll need somebody to practice on, because she doesn't want him reading her mind, obviously, because she's got this whole plan and he can't fuck it up, but he's smart and knows that probably she's hiding something. So he's doing this whole deal, with complete awareness. And she's just frustrated at the fact that her enemy is actually smart. And I understand that. So it ends with, she flinched as he reached out, but made herself stand still. This had better work. And that is the end of 27. So we'll see. I'm sorry that you missed the beginning, Ashley, but I'm sure you'll go back and watch it. I'm super curious about your thoughts on what I talk about in the first section of this episode. And anybody listening would like to hear from you also. So let me know. And I'm going to have to wrap up. But thank you all again so much for listening. I appreciate you. And I will see you soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.